You sure? The button didn't show up on mine. Do you see something where it says we're recording?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to TL9000 R6 Changes and Transition Guidance. Many of you are first-time attendees to our webinars, so let me introduce you to the Desera Group. Desera is a consulting company that started back in 2008 to work with companies who want to improve their effectiveness and efficiency. Typically, we use standards like ISO 9001 as a foundation, and in particular, we're experts and contributing authors to TL 9000. In fact, we have more TL 9000 certified experts on our team than any other company. And we've worked with companies from the largest to the smallest, including service providers and suppliers of hardware, software, and services to get TL 9000 certification since 1999, before we even started the Desera Group. Right now, we're heavily engaged with helping companies transition to TL 9000 R6 and ISO 9001 2015 through transition workshops, through training, and through ongoing consulting. We help clients realize the benefits of the transition in a cost-effective way. And we do these webinars to support our clients and also to introduce ourselves to people who may need some outside expert support so that you'll know what we offer. And you'll pardon my doing a little bit of promotion, self-promotion as we go through this. It's shameless. We're giving away the webinar so that and some resources so that you can see what we do and kind of give us a test drive if we might be somebody that you want to work with in the future. And if all you ever want to do is just attend webinars, that's perfectly all right too, but gives you a little chance of a sample and to meet some of our consultants. So I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Karen Rawson, and I'm the Vice President of Desera. I have Dave Sanicola, who's also on the line. Hi, Dave. He's on the line to help manage the question panel and to chip in if I leave anything important out.
Hi, Karen, and we have a question to see if the audio was working. I just wanted to verify. If anyone else is having a problem with the audio, please let us know.
You can use that hand raise button and Dave will be able to monitor that, but I know you'll give us a real warm and fuzzy if you can just write, "I can hear you just fine."
Working fine here. Okay, go on.
Thank you. So we started Desera back in 2008 after we'd worked together in Quest Forum dating back to 1999. We're both active in creating standards, including some of the ISO standards. And as I said, we train and consult with companies to get the most out of using those standards. So now on with the presentation itself. TL 9000 R6 changes. We're going to be moving incredibly fast today. Just to give you a short explanation of everything in TL 9000 that we added on top of ISO 9001, that would take almost the whole hour. So we're really only going to hit the high points of the TL 9000 changes, and I'll point you in the direction of resources to get more of what you need, and we will have follow-on webinars from this, as well as training that you can bring in-house, or some additional webinars that will be, not webinars, but virtual instructor-led training that we'll be offering throughout the year. And then after we go through the changes, we'll cover some of the important information you need to know to get your organization through the transition itself. Now, first of all, why did TL 9000 change? As you know, because most people on this call are already certified to TL 9000, TL 9000 always has included everything from ISO 9001 and then the requirements that TL 9000 adds on top of it. So when ISO 9001 changed in 2015, TL 9000 needed a change in response to that, and we were, with Quest Forum, updating TL 9000 right along in parallel with ISO 9001 changes and analyzing what those changes were so that TL 9000 could make any deletions that were being covered by the new ISO standard. Well, why did ISO change? Because TL 9000 changed. And the things that TL 9000 was looking to do were to reduce the emphasis on documentation. That was one of the complaints that many users had. And users wanted to focus on improvement, or they wanted quality not just be off to the side, but to be tied into business strategy. And while ISO 9001 referenced the process approach, TL 9000 emphasized it even harder, but ISO 9001 really expects the process approach to be used throughout business now. And then they wanted to clarify the idea of preventive action. They introduced the concept of risk-based thinking. They emphasize performance. The aim of ISO 9001:2015 is to add value to the business. And then the numbering system, why did it change? It changed to align with other ISO standards that are all using this 10-clause format, and they're using common terms and common numbering. So for example, if you're using ISO 14001, it also changed in 2015 to have that 10-clause numbering system. So TL 9000 does as well. TL includes all the changes in ISO 9001:2015, as well as some changes that were important to the information and communications technology industry. So we'll take the first part of this presentation to talk about what changed in ISO 9001:2015. Now, originally when we set up this webinar, I assumed that a lot of people had already had quite a bit of training on ISO 9001:2015, but then when I did the survey at sign up, I realized that a good portion of our audience today had not even really had any training on ISO 9001:2015. They were waiting for the new TL standard to come out. So we're going to go through the ISO 9001 changes at a very high level. What I'm covering now in this webinar, I would typically cover in a full 1-hour webinar, and we'll be doing some of those changes next week in our next webinar, which I believe is Tuesday afternoon. So first we'll go through the attention grabbers. There are a lot of things that changed that got a lot of press in the magazines and stuff before the standard was released. But when you look at them, they're not such a big change after all. The idea of having 10 clauses instead of 8 scares a lot of people because they feel like they'll have to renumber their documentation. You can renumber your documentation if you'd like to, but it's not necessary. Your quality management system is your quality management system, and you can point to auditors, you can give them some assistance to find where you address different clauses, but your system does not need to be numbered to match ISO 9001 or TL 9000. ISO changed vocabulary in a number of places for clarity of intent. Not such a big change when you see what those are. ISO used to require a specified management representative. That's no longer a requirement. That can be distributed and handled in different ways. A quality manual is no longer required, and there used to be 6 specific documented procedures required in ISO 9001. They no longer actually make specified documented procedures. However, and the big however, first of all, let's go through the vocabulary changes. Products changed to products and services. TL 9000 has always considered products to be products and services, so that's nothing new to us. Suppliers changed to external provider. Some people looked at suppliers as just the people who provided parts. External provider could include subcontractors. It could include other parts of your corporate structure who provide inputs to your quality management system, but they're not within your certified system. They may be part of another certified system or not certified at all. Documents and records, they changed to documented information. They just used one word to cover them both. Work environment changed. Purchased product has a different name, many more words. They're getting page count up on that. They don't have a management representative, but they now make reference to leadership. Preventive action is not referenced, but now we use the term risk. And while they don't require specified documented procedures, you'll still need them. They don't require a quality manual, but you may still want one or something like it. And they don't use the term exclusion, but they do say that if something is not applicable, it must be justified, and that remains in TL 9000 as well. Now, the numbering system that scared a lot of people, this table gives you a rough correlation, and in your handout that I said download from that handout tab on the control panel, and I'll also send it to you, but ISO actually gives some guidance on this. So Clause 4, the basic information about ISO 9001 is now called Context of the Organization. It includes old 4.1 plus some new requirements, and it broke some of them out into Clause 7. TL 9000 also drafted a couple of clauses from old Section 3 of TL were moved into Clause 4. They've always been requirements, now they're in Clause 4. Management responsibility was broken up to 2 clauses. Resource management pretty much transferred right over, but picked up a couple of those things from old Clause 4, like documentation. Old Clause 7 that had the requirements for design and purchasing and production and service realization, your work instructions and so forth. That's all included in Clause 8, but it also dragged in some parts of old Clause 8, so that can be a little confusing. And then old measurement analysis and improvement was broken into 2 new clauses that also dragged in a little bit of stuff from Clause 5 on management review. So there are correlation matrices and documented information guidance there at the ISO page, and we cover that more in our other training. Now, these are the things that really changed. These are the things you need to know and act on. I call them the big 5. Context of the organization, interested parties' needs and expectation, those are the clause numbers 4.1 and 4.2. The expectations of leadership in Clause 5.1.1, and it's not exactly a clause, but it's referenced throughout. The use of the process approach and risk-based thinking are required of leadership. And then risk-based thinking itself is directly required or implied in at least 13 clauses. And you're saying, well, Karen, TL 9000 had risk approach to project management in it already. And that is exactly true. TL 9000 has, over the years, been in advance of ISO 9001 in requirements that our industry puts in that ISO 9001 doesn't directly reference. So we've already had reference to risk in our standard, and now ISO 9001 is making it explicit and requiring it directly or implying it in at least 13 clauses that we will go through in our risk-based thinking virtual instructor-led training or our on-site training. So those are the big 5. The big 5: context, interested parties, expectations of leadership, process approach, and risk-based thinking. But there are a bunch of things that changed also within some of the clauses. You need to study these, understand, and apply them. In our 1-day and 3-day training classes, and also in auditor training, we go through these carefully, and auditors will pursue them on transition. They'll definitely look for process approach, definitely look at quality objectives. There are wording changes here. Change management is covered. Monitoring and measurement has some changes. There's a new term in there, organizational knowledge, as it relates to also competence and awareness, changes there. New requirements under communication, new requirements under design and development planning. There's information on outsourcing included in the appendix as well. They didn't make a very big deal about outsourcing in 2000 or 2008 versions of ISO 9001, but now that's explicit. A little bit more on control of non-conforming outputs. And there's information on management review inputs, which we'll cover a little bit more today when we talk about leadership requirements, and nonconformity and corrective action. So let's dig into those. I'll give you that if you're looking for a screenshot of that. You really need to understand those, and those are the areas that your auditors will be looking especially into when they do your transition audit. So let's dig into those changes. I call them the big 5, but I always put context to the organization and interested parties as the 1-2 punch in one description. So let's look at those 2 first. Clause 4.1. In the box, that's exactly what ISO 9001 says. And I very carefully quote from ISO 9001 and TL 9000 in our training classes because that is copyrighted material. You need to buy copies of those standards, and as you go through our webinars, as you go through our virtual instructor-led training, you'll want to have your copies of the books open because it's kind of like sing along in the hymnal with me. You want to know the exact words. But those are the exact words of part of Clause 4.1 there under ISO 9001 in the box. And what ISO 9001 asks you to do is, first of all, define your organization's purpose and strategic direction. That is not a grassroots effort. That's a requirement of leadership. And leadership also needs to define the results that the organization intends to achieve through its quality management system. So that would be the results that you intend to get based on the objectives for quality that you put out there. Those are defined by top management. So leadership needs to understand Clause 4.1 in detail. Then it also says that the organization, in the first line, the organization shall determine external and internal issues. Well, what are those external and internal issues that are relevant to your purpose and your strategic direction and can affect your results? And then finally, the last sentence there about monitoring and reviewing. When does top management do monitor and review? Well, monitoring is ongoing, and reviewing would be new input to the management review process, which I'd highly recommend not be a once-a-year dog and pony show for a number of reasons. So that clause 4.1 definitely needs to be understood by top management. And then 4.2 is another one along those. That's why I call it the 1-2 punch. ISO is in the box, and to the right is those things that top management needs to understand and you need to go through in your transition. These are the questions that your certification body will want to make sure that your organization understands and applies. Have you defined who are the relevant interested parties? Now, relevant interested parties, as it says over here in the statement of 4.2, are those folks who have an effect or potential effect on your ability to consistently provide products and services that meet requirements. Okay, so who can affect that? Well, certainly your own employees, certainly your customers, your suppliers, maybe your competitors can. When I said suppliers, I should have said external providers, because external providers could include subcontract manufacturers, subcontract processes that you use. It could include parts of your corporate structure that aren't within your certification scope. It could include Quest Forum and changes that Quest Forum may make. It could include regulatory requirements that may have an impact on your quality management system. So you need to define who are those relevant interested parties to your quality management system based on how they can affect you, and know what they require. And then you need to have a systematic method for monitoring information about those interested parties and their requirements. So we'll talk more about what leadership has to do about those, but you can see right there, that's not something that's a grassroots effort. That's a top management requirement. But it has influence throughout your certified system. The importance of context of the organization and your interested parties is their overall influence on your management system and therefore on your audits. They influence your documented information, the procedures, the records that you have. They influence how you work with your customers and what your objectives are. They will influence what you monitor, what you measure, how you monitor and measure your products and services and your processes. They'll certainly influence competency and organizational requirements and how you do succession planning. They'll influence your products themselves, and they'll influence how you work with your external providers. So when your auditor understands those, and when your own organization understands the context of your organization and your interested parties, that drives the shape and feel of your quality management system and how audits are planned and how processes are planned. So that's big stuff that we actually go through a workshop, and on the resource page that you'll be getting a mailer about coming up, we've got a little worksheet that you can use that can help guide you as a first effort toward defining your context of your organization. Okay, so the 1-2 punch, and then the next one is leadership, and I've alluded to that because leadership is responsible for developing and understanding and using the context of the organization and interested parties. So the third big change to ISO 9001 that's reflected in TL 9000, leadership. It's in Clause 5, and auditors will not just go interview leadership about this. They'll look for evidence throughout the entire organization and throughout audits for whether leadership is doing these things. They'll be looking to see that they're using the 7 quality management principles. It used to be 8 in old ISO, now it's 7. They're found in ISO 9000 2015, which is the companion document that has all the vocabulary, and it's available online. I give you a link to that in the handout. They'll be looking for a documented policy. Top management's responsible for the quality policy that reflects the purpose, context, and strategic direction. They'll be looking to see that it's understood and applied throughout the organization. Not just do people know what it is, but how do they use it in their job, and do jobs tie directly all the way up through the organization to the objectives for quality, to the results that the organization wants to achieve through its policy. They'll be looking for improvement. Does leadership have an emphasis on improvement, and do they see evidence? Can they show the auditors evidence of improvement and of customer focus? And do we see evidence of the use of risk-based thinking starting at the top in an organization? Also, it's not included in Clause 5, it's actually included in Clause 9, the management review process. There are those new items. So where it talked about context of the organization, interested parties, their needs and expectations, where it talks about risks and opportunities, top management is expected through the management review process, and managers at all levels are expected to be looking at those those items. So management review takes on some new parts that may not have been there in the past. And moving rapidly through, we had the first three. The fourth big requirement change in ISO 9001 is the process approach. And as I said, if you've been doing TL 9000, you say, hey Karen, process approach, ho hum, we've been doing that. TL 9000 required us to have measures of our key processes that were that affected product requirements, and we've been monitoring and measuring our processes, and that's what our auditors look for. Well, newsflash, apparently that was not well understood and deployed throughout all organizations that were ISO 9001 certified, and auditors will be having a special emphasis on that because it's emphasized throughout the requirements of ISO 9001. In fact, where it says there that this diagram is based on clause 0.3 of ISO 9001-2015, that's part of ISO 9001 that is not included in TL 9000. TL 9000 picks up ISO 9001 at clause 4. So you can find this process approach described in ISO 9001 if you have a copy of that. Some great basic information in ISO 9001, and it gives insight into what certification bodies are looking for. But assuming you've been following the process approach, then you have your policy, your objectives, your resources planned, and now ISO is asking you to identify your risks associated with your quality management system and the things you intend to achieve. It's asking you to plan how your processes work, plan the measures that you'll use on your processes and over your business. Then you do implement what was planned, and as TL has always emphasized, monitoring and measuring your processes and the results versus those plans. And then through management review and through process owners monitoring and acting on the data that they get back from their processes, taking action to improve. Now the big one, when we did the survey at the beginning of the sign-up process for this webinar, we said what's going to be the hardest to implement about TL 9000. The number one answer was risk-based thinking, because it's new to a lot of people. They're not really sure what ISO is talking about there. We're going to do a whole virtual instructor-led training program on this. You'll see mailers coming out for it. We've put it out off until TL 9000 was released, but it'll be coming in the next quarter. So you want to attend that to learn more about this. But just to hit the high points here so you have some idea, that's why you're on this webinar. What does ISO ask? As I said, TL has always asked more than ISO about approaching risks in your processes. But it's new to ISO 9001. They didn't mention risks before, though they implied it through preventive action and anticipating potential problems, through analyzing your nonconformities and preventing problems, addressing the causes. And so now they're saying, based on your organization's vision and mission and objectives and strategy and what your stakeholders need, your interested parties need and require, they're asking you to determine the risks and opportunities and to plan for the actions to address those risks. This is all in clause 6 of ISO 9001-2015. So let's go through what some of the wording says. In clause 6 in planning, in 6.1, it asks you to take actions to address risks and opportunities. And with respect to risks and opportunities, they're talking about risks to cost, quality, speed, and therefore ultimately profitability. That's what your quality management system is designed to protect. So they say consider the issues from 4.1 and the interested parties requirements from 4.2 and determine the risks and opportunities to meet your goals, to mitigate problems, and to achieve gains and improvements. And when you think of that, in our industry, achieving gains and improvements are where the risks come about. We've constantly got new software releases. We've got new upgrades to products. We've got new technology that enters the network. We've got lots and lots of change and churn that happens that affects our quality management system and our ability to achieve our goals. Those represent opportunities, but whenever you've got opportunities, you've also got to say, are we willing to take the risk associated with that? So you do a new release and of software and you realize it may have bugs, it may break something. What do you have in terms of a rollback or bug fixes and so forth that you may have to put in there? What is your organization's approach to that? So it asks you to plan in advance your actions to address the risks that you identify. And this is standard risk methodology. There are 5 things that you can do when you find you have a risk. You can come up with ways to reduce the risk, or you can say, you know, I'm going to take that risk knowing that there are potential upsides and consequences. You would never get a software release out the door if it had to be absolutely perfect. You know that there are risks, and you decide how far you're going to go on those risks so that you can begin getting the upsides and what would be the consequences of those risks. And then you need to have plans to address opportunities, such as I said, the things that happen in our industry. Clause 6.1 also talks about implementation. You're not expected to have a formal process that covers every part of your business. They don't say you have to define a risk process that addresses your entire business. What's expected is that you demonstrate compliance and commitment to risk-based thinking. It addresses that in the leadership clause 5.1d. So therefore, you could use different methods and different levels of formality across your processes. For example, your purchasing process already has risk-based thinking embedded in it. You've got stuff embedded in your purchasing process that may have to do with supplier assessments and alternate suppliers, and how much safety stock do you carry on something when you get into hurricane season, for example. Those would be ways that organizations are already embedding risk-based thinking, but the way that purchasing does its risk-based thinking may be different or less formal than risk-based thinking as it's applied to project management for the design and development of new products that are going into the network. And the process FMEAs that are done in manufacturing are very different than ways of doing risk-based thinking in different sorts of processes. So you can use different methods, but what we're expecting is something that is repeatable, that allows you to identify risks and opportunities, analyze their impact either quantitatively, qualitatively, or both, that allows you to plan your response and allows you to control for those risks by periodically reviewing, do those risks still stand? Are approaches to address them still appropriate? And we update those risks based on new knowledge and new circumstances. That's what certification bodies will be looking for, and what you should drive into your organization based on the guidance that ISO 9001 is saying. These will help you. The fact is, to quote, pass an audit, you could get away with surprisingly little. And what you're doing there is you're introducing risks into your business and failing to take advantage of the opportunities of using ISO 9001 to its fullest. I caution you against this. First of all, the effects of poor planning on results for your customers and your business, if you don't take advantage of this opportunity to really dig into risk management. And then a sloppy job is going to be a waste of time and a paperwork drill. And if you try to go back and do it later in a proper manner, your stakeholders within the business are going to roll their eyes and say, here we go again, even if this time you intend to do it right. So what we're advising our clients is to do a solid job up front. You don't have to do it absolutely perfectly, but do a solid job up front and improve on it as you go along and gain the respect and the benefits from applying Clause 6 of ISO 9001. Okay, so those are the main clauses that we talked about in ISO 9001 that are embedded in TL 9000, right? Because TL 9000 is built on top of ISO 9001. So the big 5 changes, context of the organization, and interested parties. That's the 1-2 punch. And then you have the process approach, risk-based thinking, and what was the other one? Why can't I think of it with all of y'all sitting right there in front of me? And leadership, the impact on leadership. Sorry, my Aleppo moment, as we say. So what changed in TL 9000 R6? Well, here's a table that shows a summary of the changes, and the red arrows are the ones we're going to emphasize today. But don't forget the white arrow ones. So we're going to emphasize the 2 new requirements that changed, and 3 of the 4 notes are associated with those 2 new requirements that we changed. And I already told you that we moved some things up from Section 3 of ISO 9001. Two requirements that have always been included in TL 9000 Section 3 actually moved into Clause 4. So those are 4 additions. And then if you take 8 clauses that were deleted and 4 instances of clauses being combined where they reduced from 8 down to 4. The impact of all those that are highlighted in red there is that we went from 92 requirements down to 84. So, big reduction of 8 requirements due to those changes. But don't forget to pay attention to these 13 right here. We're not going over them in detail today, but the 13 requirements that were modified have some important changes in them that will be audited and you need to respond to. But I'm hitting the high points here, the big ones. The good news about one of the new, quote, new requirements is that it's not all that new. The requirement 922C1 says that it is internal audit program planning. And if you've been doing your internal audits properly, you're going to look at this and say, well, that's not a new requirement. And in fact, when we came out with TL 9000 R5, I had put in to the hopper a request for making this change, and I got laughed out of the room. Quest Forum said, everybody's already doing that anyway. But over time, we realized they weren't necessarily doing it or doing a good job of it, and we wanted to make it extremely explicit in the TL 9000 adder. It says, include all applicable requirements from the TL 9000 Requirements Handbook and the TL 9000 Measurements Handbook in the internal audit program. Well, you have to audit your measurements because they're used for benchmarking across organizations, and you have to count on your peer organizations to put good benchmarking data in there if you're going to be able to use it. So we rely on certified organizations to submit accurate data, and yes, you're audited by your certification body, but you know where the warts are. You do that internally. You're required to do your internal audits. And it must include a thorough assessment of TL 9000 measurements, collection, validation, and reporting. So CBs will be looking for appropriate rigor across all requirements, especially measurements. Now, pay attention to this. Not that you weren't paying attention already, but I just want to pause here on CBs will be looking for appropriate rigor across all requirements and measurements. Because you and I both know that your internal audit program takes far more time to plan and implement and respond to than your certification body's audit program. At least 3 times as much time we found on average. So your certification body will be taking a look at the competence level of your auditors. And they'll be saying, well, if you're auditing your TL 9000 measurements, how do I know that your TL 9000 measurements auditor is truly competent to audit those measurements? And what I've found is I've gone into companies to do their gap assessments or to work with them on implementing TL 9000 measurements, is the people that actually collect and validate and report measurements are often very well versed in how that all works. But not a lot of other people in the organization are very well versed, and some of the internal auditors aren't. So that's one of the areas that companies will often go for outside support. May ask for a contract audit of just their internal audit process and of their TL 9000 measurements, collection, validation, and reporting process. And that's the kind of thing that the Disera group does, or you may rely on somebody from a sister organization who is adept at that in their part of the organization that's outside of your TL 9000 certification, of your certificate. So those are areas that auditors will be looking for particular competence. How have you ensured the competence of your auditors now that the TL 9000 requirements and requirements have changed and ISO 9001 has changed in such a big way? Okay, so that was the new requirement that's not so much a new requirement. This is the new requirement that's a big new requirement. But luckily it's been phased in by some of the large service providers over time and some of the large suppliers over time, so it may not be all that new to you. Clause 913C3, Sustainability Assessment, says that you have to assess the status of your organization's sustainability effort. And the definition of sustainability is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That quote right there is from the glossary of TL 9000. It was in the last version of TL. It's in the new version as well, but this time we actually have a clause that is a requirement. And I know somebody's going to be sitting there saying, oh, Karen, that clause says that you should do it, not that you shall do it. Well, all of you who have had proper TL 9000 training know that should is essentially a shall. If you're saying that, oh, well, we don't think we need to do that, then you need to write a justification for why you don't need to do that. and maybe somebody would be able to justify why they don't need to have a sustainability effort within their organization, and there will be some organizations that are able to prove that, demonstrate that to their certification bodies, but certification bodies are going to be looking at that very carefully. It also says as appropriate to your processes, products, and services. Now, when it says your sustainability effort, what they're talking about is things like environmental management. So you would assess the status of your sustainability effort with respect to environmental management, with respect to measuring and improving your carbon footprint, or your corporate social responsibility, or your design for environmental concern, design for sustainability. So you may have different efforts within your organization, and you assess yourself against what's important to your organization. There's a link on the Quest Forum site, and I'll give you the link in the resources page that you can download as part of this webinar, for an optional fee-based assessment model. It's very reasonably priced. They really want to get people going, and the service providers in some cases are offering to pay for your license to use that model. So check with your customers to see if that's something that applies to you. That change was made in TL9000 because the ICT industry leaders are driving sustainability, and so our members proposed and voted to accept the requirement. So CBs are not looking for a one-shot, okay, I filled out this form. They're looking for a repeatable process with an owner, with records, with objectives, and with management oversight. They're looking for a serious effort here. So be sure you understand that clause and that you take the time to properly implement it and put it into your business processes to use in year after year after year. Okay, so those were the two new requirements. These are the two requirements that were moved from Clause 3 of TL9000 R5.5 into Clause 4 of TL9000 R6. They've always been there. There's no change in intent. However, I'll caution you that they aren't always met. So since they're in Clause 4 now, CBs will probably take an extra special look to be sure that your registration profile actually meets TL9000 requirements. The first one lists the requirements for your registration profile, and the second one says what should and shouldn't be in your scope statement. So read those and be sure that you accurately apply those. Now, there are 4 new notes. The first 3 relate to that new clause, 913C3, and relate to the notes that were moved from the old Section 3 of TL9000. And then there's one new note, and you'll see it doesn't have a letter in it. It's 852 note. Well, it's actually a note that TL9000 added onto ISO 9001 because we at Quest Forum felt that they didn't adequately describe what process outputs meant, at least in our industry. And I quote it right there in the gray box. So you'll want to take that into account when you're applying. And remember, notes aren't auditable, but they give you guidance on what the standard actually means when it says any of those things. Now, I told you that there were 8 clauses that were reduced to 4. This is Quest Forum math right here. I'm speaking in clause. And what happened was there were 4 pairs that each pair reduced into a single requirement. So design and development requirements, there was one related to hardware and another one that was a common requirement. They were combined into one for design and development requirements. There were 2 clauses that related to process quality measurements. They were consolidated into one. There were 2 clauses that were related to software patching. They were consolidated into one. And there were 2 clauses that were related to performance data, one for hardware software, one for services, so they became a single common requirement. So check yourself to be sure that you have got all of those incorporated in your management system. If you were doing them before, you're probably doing them now. If you number your clauses in relation to TL9000 requirements, there's a case where you're going to be renumbering. There were 9 notes that were deleted. Remember, paragraphs marked note are just for understanding. They're not subject to audit, but these are the notes, and you'll just find them missing, and they were deleted either because a clause changed or because they're no longer relevant to the ICT industry or because ISO took them on. For various reasons, they were deleted. The notes are no longer relevant. Now, pay attention. I tend to say dog-ear this page. Well, you can't exactly dog-ear the page of your unless you won't get a printout of this. We do include it in our training. You get handouts in your training, but dog-ear this mentally or take a picture of it with your phone. These are the 13 requirements from R5.5 that were modified. Be sure to review these. And I know we're running short of time, but I want to call out one just to give you an example of what was modified for clarity that could modify what you're actually doing. And this was questioned by somebody yesterday when I sent out that additional mailer, and that's why, just because she replied to me, thanks Diana, I'm giving you a little update on this one, 71C2 Disaster Recovery, which became 711C1 Business Continuity. Now, disaster recovery, in some people's mind, only applies to getting your data up to speed. That's not what TL9000 interpreted it after a disaster, to get your data working again and available. TL9000 always meant be ready to service your product and services for your customer. So we made that much more explicit and expanded the scope of that requirement to include business continuity. So if your organization had disaster recovery light, if you didn't include it in a full business continuity plan, you got some work to do. Many of you will already be meeting that requirement, but you want to take a look at that and at all of the ones on this page to see, are you actually meeting the modifications that are in there? They're not huge changes, they're not new requirements, but in some cases you will have to do some additional work. So just once again, if you didn't get it, the summary here was there were 2 new requirements, there were 13 modified requirements, 2 moved from Section 3, and there were the 8 requirements that were reduced to 4, and that results in, and then there are a number of them that the only changes were minor rewording and terminology and renumbering that were related to changes in ISO 9001 that you should find fairly transparent. Summary of the changes in TL 9000 R6. ISO 9001 2015 and TL 9000 continue to align, and ISO 9001 continues to be included in TL 9000, but you've now got 10 clauses instead of 8. We carry the vocabulary through, so we continue to be consistent with the wording of ISO 9001. There are 2 new TL 9000 requirements, the one about internal audits that was always implied, now it's explicit, and then the sustainability requirement, which is probably new to almost everyone, and it's one you want to take your time and do and develop a repeatable process that you can demonstrate that management has oversight of, has an owner, and you're continuing to look at it over time. There are some requirements that were deleted and some notes that were deleted or changed due to the deletions or changes in the TL 9000 requirements. And there are 13 TL 9000 requirements that were changed in minor ways, but you do need to understand and respond to those accordingly. They will be audited. Those are not just rewording. The 13 that I listed, you do need to take a look at, and we'll cover those in future training. So you may say, Karen, where can I get some more training on TL 9000 training, some more training on these requirements on R6? Well, if you go to the Quest Forum website, they do offer an e-learning course. It's about an hour long. It's flipping through slides. It'll feel like you're watching a webinar. What you get, though, is registration with TL 9000 that you've gone through that training. So it only covers the TL 9000 clauses, not the ISO 9001 changes that we did today. It strictly says those things that I did in the second part of our webinar where I said, here's a clause, here's an adder, here's a note that was reduced, and it does go through those 13 changes, but it just pretty much reads them to you and says these are the ones that changed with a little bit of commentary. That e-learning course is required for CB auditors. Now, it's required for CB auditors, and it's not a 3-day class or anything because it's assumed that they have gotten, well, it's required that they have gotten their ISO 9001 2015 training through the certification bodies that they work with. So CB auditors, we're just giving them the extra stuff on top of ISO 9001 that they need to be qualified to conduct TL 9000 auditors. And they're assumed to have had, well, they must have had all the preliminary TL 9000 training that came before this over the years. They can get that upgrade training if they've had all the other stuff and be qualified. That e-learning is not required for your organization. You do not have to take the TL 9000 e-learning training from Quest Forum for your organization, but you must show how you developed your competence to do your job with respect to the quality management system, and for those people who have audit responsibilities to fulfill their audit responsibilities to use and audit TL 9000. You can demonstrate your competence through a combination of education, training, skills, and experience. So, for example, you may have had people who sit on the Quest Forum, who go to the Quest Forum meetings and participate in authoring TL 9000. or representatives from your company who do that, and then come and train the people within your organization who function as auditors or who are process owners, or they may lead internal study groups or workshops. They're the internal subject matter experts who have done the study and have the experience with TL 9000 to be able to get people's skills up. You can also get outside subject matter experts, maybe from your sister organizations, maybe from an outside consultant or other expert that you have. And certification bodies are offering training on ISO 9001:2015, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, what's new for transition audits? This is the second of the big points we said we'd cover in this. We said we'd cover the changes in TL 9000. So we went through ISO 9001 changes in TL 9000. Then we went through, then we're going to go through what's new in the transition audits. What do you have to do in order to audit? And finally, we're going to end with how do we get leadership on board? So now the transition audit information, and it's going to be brief. We've gone through this in some of our other webinars, but just for today, because many people have waited to get this information until today, I'll tell you what we've gleaned from working with multiple certification bodies as consultants. We're DeSera Consults. We don't do these certification body audits, but we've asked certification bodies, and we've certainly worked with ANAB, who accredits the certification bodies, and we've looked at the documents that come down from the International Accreditation Forum, where they say here are the rules for accreditation bodies, for accreditation bodies. So this is what Quest Forum is expecting from certification bodies. I'll let you know that organizations are transitioning, for the most part, during their triennial audit. So when you get every 3 years, you get a full system audit. That is the best time, and the time that most people are planning on getting their new certificate, because that new certificate will last for 3 years from their triennial audit. So if you're having your triennial audit in October of 2017, then you'll get a new certificate that this is good to ISO 9000 or to TL 9000 R6 all the way through 2020. You get a 3-year certificate. In any case, you have to do your transition before September 2018. So if your triennial audit is due in the 4th quarter of 2018, you're out of luck. You have to transition before that. And I'll show you in a second what the other way to do it. It doesn't add a significant amount of time to your audit. You'll negotiate with your certification body auditor, but for an average size organization with average complexity and maturity, you might get an extra day added on. And they've probably been talking to you about it as you go through your surveillance audits. The second way that you can transition, instead of waiting until your triennial audit, and for companies that had their triennial audit in early 2016 before TL 9000 changed, the second way that you can do that is through a surveillance audit or through a separate special visit where they just focus on the parts that changed. Now, if that's the case, if you had a certification audit, say in 2016, your triennial audit happened, or you just initially got certified at TL 9000 in 2016, okay, that certificate is good until 2019. But the problem is it automatically expires in September 2018, even though it was a 3-year certificate, because TL 9000 R5.5 expires in 2018. So what you have to do is at some point before September 2018, you have to have a special visit or use one of your surveillance audits to go through all the changes to TL 9000 R6, which would include all the changes to ISO 9001:2015. So there may be some additional time required, right? If it was just a surveillance audit, it's only getting part of your system. It might not get all the requirements because they didn't apply to all of your processes that would be being audited. So you may have a little bit of extra time added. Maybe they'd want to visit some extra sites if maybe your headquarters office wasn't on the list and they're going to have to go there, or they have to visit someplace where clauses are only done at that site. So work with your certification body on that to plan if you have to go through a surveillance option. Otherwise, they'll cover everything during your triennial audit. The important thing to keep in mind, this should be in red and bold, and I've said it twice on this page already, your certificate, if it's to R5.5, expires on September 15th, 2018. And you would then have to go through a whole new audit after that. Okay, so that's at your option. You'll come down off the Quest Forum website at that point if you have not upgraded to R5.5. So give yourself enough time to get there. Here's some more guidance. Before your transition audit, these are things you need to do. I mean, this is just common sense, but I'm spelling it out if you want to list the steps that I shouldn't say it's just common sense. It is spelling out the requirements that you have to have, things to build into your transition process. Review and update your quality management system to meet the new standard, which does not mean change all your documents, numbering system. Just be sure you take in all the risk-based thinking and the interested parties and the project plan and the things that you have to do, all those clauses that we said are changing. Hey, you know, if clauses were deleted, you do not have to delete those from your quality management system if there's something that still adds value to you. Okay, so you can go on and continue to do your 2008 requirements and leave them in your management system while you're upgrading and continue to be audited in 2008 if you want to be. But by the time you do your transition audit, you've got to have your R6 stuff in there, whether or not you've deleted any old stuff. It's up to you. To do it whatever makes sense to you, because you certainly have additional requirements in your system beyond what TL requires. So there's no problem to have stuff in there that's been obsoleted if it still makes sense for you. Then you have to complete a full system audit to the new standard and quality management system changes. Even if you're just getting a surveillance audit, you need to do your own full system audit to the new standard and quality management system changes, and you need to do a full management review because they'll be auditing management review to see if they've covered all the new stuff. Now, CBs are offering formal training. Remember, they can only give you generic training. They're giving webinars, which isn't in a whole lot of depth any more than today's is in depth, but rely on a combination of training, experience, skills, and experience. They also, CBs can't give specific guidance on applying those requirements or to your internal audits or to your processes. So CBs can give formal training, consider it public training. You may want some internal stuff customized for you. CBs can do an actual pre-assessment. But once again, they can just say yes or no. They can't give advice on how to meet requirements. Now, we at DeSera Group, we can because we're consultants. We don't hold your certificate at risk. So now, our advice on DeSera guidance is to really understand the new standard. Don't just train your auditors. Consider doing implementation workshops and study this together. We recommend that you do 2 full rounds of internal audits. It'll help with the additional skills that your auditors will get. We encourage you to get coaching and shadowing by expert auditors. Maybe some of your people who've gone into retirement who are excellent auditors, bring them out and use this as a chance to upgrade audit skills and also get input from your internal clients. We also urge you to do 2 full management reviews, and I can't emphasize enough, this is not business as usual with your auditors. You need to be prepared for your audit. And now it looks like we're going to run a little over, but I'm just going to give you getting leadership on board. Here are the things your leaders need to know and demonstrate through the audit process. I'm going to put them all up on the screen. It's more than just knowing Clause 5. Look at all those areas they need to know about. We're emphasizing Clause 4, and we're emphasizing Clause 6 on this because Clause 5, which is leadership, goes without saying. Okay, they need to truly use the process approach in business. They need to truly understand external and internal issues, the context of the organization, the interested parties' requirements. They need to constantly monitor those, well, consistently monitor those and update them as appropriate and use them throughout the processes. Risk-based thinking is embedded throughout the standard. It needs to start from the top down. They need to monitor and oversee the actions to address risks and opportunities and have plans to address across all levels. You'll see things we didn't even cover today. The requirements for resources, awareness, and communication, and the emphasis on performance evaluation and improvement. Emphasizing again that do not expect business as usual. And I further warn you guys that I haven't done in my ISO 9001 webinars. TL 9000 auditors are held to a very high standard. They have an additional code of practice. They will be looking very carefully at the TL 9000 adders, including those 13 that changed, to be sure that you've met them. Now, the DeSera Group, knowing that getting leadership on board is one of the most critical aspects of transition, we have invited Dr. Nigel Croft to the United States to speak at different locations around the country. We can also take him on site by request and turn that into a 2-day workshop for you, where you bring Nigel Croft comes with us on the first day, and then on the second day we do the in-depth training on TL 9000 changes and ISO 9001 changes and get your people up to speed. Dr. Nigel Croft spoke at the Quest Forum Academy webinar last year. He's the chairman of the ISO committee that wrote ISO 9001 and the related standard. He's the guy that has the insight into the intent of ISO 9001 2015, and when the big guns in your organization need somebody outside the organization to tell them what's this all about, he's the world's expert, okay? And when you pair him with Dave Sanicola, you've got the 1-2 punch that will really hit people between the eyes with what needs to change. So we're making ourselves available in December for these 1 or 2 day on-site workshops, customized, or for the sites that are listed there. They're listed on our website, and due to this webinar, we have extended the discount to Saturday. So go to our website, look for the ISO 9001 2015 training. It was also in the meeting invitation, and I'll hit you up again with this link so that you can sign up for it. And we'd love to talk with you about bringing him on site to your facility. He doesn't come to the United States very often, and while he's here, it would be a great opportunity going into 2017 to do some planning with your leadership. On our website, we've got quite a bit of TL 9000 training. It's listed as ISO 9001 training because that's where many, many clients are, and they're looking, and it's been up there for quite a while. But our TL 9000 courses include ISO 9001 2015, and then we customize to meet your learning needs, whether you have any requirements that aren't applicable, or whether you're software related or hardware software services related. So look under the training tab, click on the custom workshops. We've got an excellent 3-day custom workshop where you get your context of the organization and interested parties and a jump start on risk-based thinking there. We do the training at your facility for your new auditors, your refresher training for your internal auditors, your management briefing. So we've got a number of programs there that we'll customize with you and bring on site. We also offer those programs in Dallas, and if we have a critical mass for TL 9000, we offer them here in our favorite Dallas training facility. So I list some of those on this slide. We also do internal audits. We do outsourced internal audits, like I said, for the measurements, where you may just want your first round of TL 9000 audits to be done by an outside body that'll make sure you get a thorough internal audit and kind of set the pace for your internal audits going forward. Those are the kinds of things that we do. And we facilitate management review meetings to the new requirements. Watch for your mailer on the Key Concepts series, where we go through the top 5 changes, the big 5, the 1-2 punch, and the other 3. For ISO 9001, we'll go through those more and with more emphasis on risk-based thinking next week. And we will be having additional programs to focus specifically on TL 9000, as well as virtual instructor-led training to watch for. If you go to our website under webinars and under videos and audios, you'll see the past offerings of our Key Concepts series. You can download those. Some of them are protected, but if any of you contact me, I will give you the keys to unlock the kingdom and get those webinars. They're 1 hour. You can plan a team meeting to go over those and take screenshots of the important parts. And give me a call to talk about any of those if you need some additional training. We did those back at the beginning of the year, so in case you missed those, there they are. So I want to thank you for attending. I think I've finished right at 3 o'clock on the nose, but Dave and I will stay on the line for any questions that have come in. And at this point, I want to open up the mic to Dave Sanicola to bring forward any questions we had. We understand if you need to log off now, but you're certainly welcome to stay on, and Dave will paraphrase or read aloud any of those questions that came in.
Well,
Dave?
Thank you, Karen. And by the way, nice job. Take a breath. God bless you.
It took me 59 minutes and 45 seconds to get through it all. I was 57 on practice, so I even slowed down.
Not bad. We've got four questions that I think are serious enough to stay on the line for if anybody wants to hear them. So some of them are pretty easy. I'll take the easy ones first, Karen. You can answer them. Will there be a way to print out this webinar?
We made a conscious decision not to allow this webinar to be printed out because we use it in our training class. So if there are some specific slides that you'd like a shot of, I encourage you to go through it again on video, take some screenshots, and use those for your own use. We have often found in adult learning, and there's research to back this up, that when you take notes in your own hand, you retain it better. Make this your own. Steal shamelessly. Give me some credit if you will. Give the Sarah Group some credit, but you'll do better if you take your own notes and build it into your own and watch it again if you didn't get it on the first time around.
Yeah, and then the second question is quite similar. Can I get a hard copy?
There you go.
So, same answer. But let's get into the technical questions now. The first one came.
Let me just say, before you do that, I said watch it again on replay. You'll get an email tomorrow that has the link to the video on it. It takes a while to upload and process, but it'll be out tomorrow, and for anyone who missed it today.
The first question of a technical nature was, can I perform the internal audits of my own company?
Dave, I'm going to let you answer that one. You are you're our audit expert.
Well,
I know the answer, and I'll check if you don't get it right.
The answer is absolutely. Of course you can, but it depends on where you sit in the company. An auditor cannot audit its own work. So if you have a very small company, it may be difficult. Certainly a certification body will give you a lot of flexibility and allow you to do the audits for your own company, but you should not be auditing your own work. I hope that answers your question. And you can always contact us if you want us to come in and do some audits for you.
And that's where a lot of highly technical companies will use us. So for example, we've worked with a company for years that does software development. They've got to report the software measures. They don't want to have go ahead, Dave.
Then there were two questions around the new TL 9000 additional requirement 913C3 on sustainability. What are your methods for sustainability? I'm not sure exactly what the words say, Karen, but basically you have to make some type of sustainability assessment of your organization. And does ISO 14001 count towards meeting 913C3? And the answer is in part yes. It certainly does. It counts towards it, but I don't believe it's the entire story. I think there needs to be other issues around sustainability and corporate social responsibility that you would want to address as well. There was a second question on the same topic. If we monitor corporate social responsibility and maintain an ISO 14000 certification, can we use this to show evidence in support of this adder? And that answer is more complete. I think yes, that's pretty close. You would need to objectively demonstrate how you monitor corporate social responsibility and demonstrate your 14001 certification as applicable and aligned with your ISO 9001 certification, and it should be sufficient. Anything you'd like to add to that one, Karen?
No, I think you hit those all very well. Did anything else come in while you were speaking?
I don't think so. I think that was it. Anyone who would like to post another question, I'd be happy to stay on the line for a few more minutes.
Okay, at this point I'm going to thank everyone for coming once again. And let's stop the recording now, Dave, so that if anyone wants to raise their hand and be unmuted and speak with us directly, they're certainly welcome to.